Predictive Analytics. You can think of this as the free consulting segment of our webinar, Open Access to Gurus Tony and Scott. Again, we have great questions coming in now, but there's still room for a few more. So just enter your questions into the text field of the webinar panel. I'll be pleased to read them aloud for Tony, Scott, or myself to respond. Let's go to the first one from Sasirajan. This is, I would like to know some data mining open source tools that one can work with as a beginner. Good news here is that those who attended the webinar today, we're going to have a follow-up email with a number of resources that will come out to you, and among them will be open source tools. It won't be the longest list, but there is a comprehensive list that we have within our training material at the courses. But in this case, we'll have a short list of a number of open source tools, and then there's a whole bunch of resources in the course material that we have for social media connections and blogs and newsletters and social groups and the like, recommended reading, all those kind of things. So you'll at least get a good start with some tools. And of course, we have to preface that if you're asking about tools, and this is kind of unfair. You asked this question very early in the presentation. So had you made it into Tony's part, you would know that if you're looking at tools, you must be on kind of chapter 5. And that's what you would be looking at after you've done a lot of your business understanding and data understanding to understand how to set up your project definition before looking for tools. But when it comes to that, yes, we will have a list of that coming out. Angela, I love this question. I'll let you know that in our quick text exchange. Angela's question, do you agree that all models are wrong, but some are useful? And I think you can even separate those two questions. And by all means, all models are wrong because no model is perfect. But are they useful? Again, you asked that question before Tony presented some of those case examples or the case summaries where we showed just how useful they can be. But let me start with Scott. What's your perspective on models being wrong and maybe some of the reasons why they're wrong and what we can do about it?
Well, thank you so much. Can you hear me, by the way?
Can hear you perfectly. Thanks, Scott.
All right, super. I had you on mute for a second. Well, first of all, I'm impressed that somebody has heard of George Box, one of the great statisticians, and one of his most famous quotes. I do agree with a tongue-in-cheek in terms of all models being wrong, but some are useful. When we were talking about going through the webinar, we talked a little bit about the fact that we want models to generalize well, and so that means that perfect predictions are not always possible and are highly improbable. So when we create models, we're looking for ballpark predictions. We want the models that we create to be applicable to other sets of data than the data that we use to create the model. So we're not looking for perfect predictions. We're looking for generality in terms of application. In that respect, we'll never get perfect predictions, but we'll get within the ballpark or the margin of error that we find acceptable. As a kind of a corollary to that, when we create models relative to the scientific method, and in the scientific method we go out and we form hypotheses, we collect data to either support or deny the hypothesis. In predictive analytics, we kind of do that after the fact. We don't necessarily use them as much for explaining things from a scientific perspective as much as we do look at the types of predictors that we have and pass them through the sniff test and go, okay, does this make sense? So predictive analytics is not as much about cause and effect as the scientific method tries to get.
Great considerations. Thanks, Scott. And Angela, I was just thinking there was, I don't know how early you logged into the event, but there was a slide in the waiting room before the event began, and I had a quote there from myself that says, as excited as I was about machine learning when I started to learn about it, and actually Tony taught me a lot about machine learning when I began my education on the topic. I put in there that I no longer use neural networks to balance my checkbook because no matter how good they are, you're not going to get an exact right answer. But nonetheless, you can get phenomenal value out of predictive analytics. So Tony, would you like to extend the response to Angela's question?
Yes, I would actually. From my idea here is that what we get out of a model is an estimate. So yes, it is inherently wrong. And we're also dealing with human behavior, which is inconsistent, unreliable, and messy. You hear me talk a lot about the idea of incremental enhancement. Direct mail, we do 1 million piece mailing, we get a 2% response rate. We're wrong 98% of the time. We're trying to figure out how to be less wrong. And not to be facetious about that at all, but that's our goal, is incremental enhancement over our current decision processes. You're absolutely right. We are dealing with estimates. Our models are never right, never will be right when we're dealing with human behavior, because there is no right answer. So going with the idea of just getting an incremental enhancement in our decision-making processes so that we can enhance our performance is the best we're going to be able to do.
That's a phenomenal perspective. The fact that you can make a phenomenal amount of return by being going from 99% wrong to 98% wrong. It's got tremendous value, and Angela just wrote back, great, thank you. So those were great perspectives. DM asks, as a green master black belt with a focus in lean and process improvement using descriptive statistics, I've taken on a few predictive modeling projects with some success, encouraging enough to learn more tools and techniques. Beyond what you offer, what are some of the basics that I should focus on to make me more competent with predictive modeling? And you know, when you say beyond what we offer, I would emphasize before we move beyond ourselves that, you know, the strategic implementation course sounds like a good complement to the tactical background that you have, to ensure from a project level that you're structuring your projects in a way that are going to ensure, like Tony said, a low-risk, high-impact approach to predictive analytics and a stepwise progression into the project with a clear roadmap. So, you know, in our course series, we use that CRISP process as the overlay. And a lot of people would say, well, you know, I can read about it and essentially skip the training, but what Scott and Tony really bring to the series is their own extensive real-world experience, so that we apply the natural messiness of predictive analytics, as we say, into the experience and allow you to encounter that directly through exercises and working through those in the classroom. So having said that, let me take these out to our instructors. By the way, we realize we're going over time. For those of you willing to stay with us, we've got over half who've begun the event with us still. We'll either have to shorten our presentation a little bit or just in the proceedings say, you know, reserve an hour and 15. But for those of you willing to hang around, we're happy to answer more questions here, maybe go until about 20 after for those of you willing to stick around. So, Tony, beyond what we offer, what are some of the basics that DM can focus on to be more confident with predictive modeling? Any ideas?
Well, I think the biggest thing, especially, we have 3 main courses, and depending on your needs and your background, you may not need all 3. But for the functional managers and people who are relatively new to this, obviously I'm going to suggest all 3 and one of the instructors. But beyond that, in all seriousness, I think the real key then is practice. I would love to be able to do the Vulcan mind meld and give you the benefit of 25 years of practicing. It's not that I know more algorithms. It's not that I know more math. Quite honestly, I've looked at a ton of problems and tried to figure out how to work through them and different ways pieces and parts fit together. There is a creative aspect to making these things work and making the right choices. And the only way I truly know how to get better at that is to do more problems and tackle more efforts.
Great consideration. Scott, would you like to extend?
Yeah, I'll give it just a slightly different perspective. As we previously mentioned, one of the biggest mistakes that people make coming into this discipline is thinking that it's all about the algorithms. To play off of what you said previously, Eric, and also Tony, it's really not. The algorithms are just tools, and the tools are no better than the person or the practitioner who's using them. Now, I'm reminded of the fact that, you know, when you think about the wealth of Western music, rock and roll, classical music, blues, whatever. All that music is composed of 12 notes. Only 12 different notes and different timings and arrangements. When we get to predictive analytics, it's even simpler than that. From a very high level, we only do two things. We either try to predict a number or we try to group things. That's basically the only two things that we do. And so if you learn the fundamentals, then everything else becomes a theme and variations.
Great considerations, both. Next is a fairly popular question by Tatiana. Sorry I joined late. Did you talk about what tools are the best to perform predictive analytics? And to some extent, Scott's response answered that. We can go into it a little more specifically. And Scott, I know that Tony went first last time, but I think for reasons you understand, I'm going to have him go first this time because we have kind of a prepared response. We are a vendor-neutral tool company, and at the same time, Tony does have a preferred tool when it comes to predictive analytics. Tony?
Well, yeah, and it's not that it's a prepared response as much as it's just straightforward. I think my favorite tool is the one you already own. And virtually everyone's got at least a statistics package. And I think what people don't understand is in most of these data mining and predictive analytics workbenches that are out there, it's the same set of algorithms that are in the stats package you've already got on your desk or somewhere in your organization. The difference is how we interpret results, how we utilize them, the way we focus. As you saw in the presentation, our focus tends to be more on the tails of the distribution and how we manipulate human behavior data, which is different than physical systems data. It's not a software solution, is my point. It's how we use the software. I go back in class and I talk about the idea, you can think about them as tools. And if you think about things like linear regression as a way of measuring things, it would be a tape measure to a carpenter, as opposed to a saw that cuts things up for classification problems. It's hard to cut things up with a tape measure, and you're probably not going to have a whole lot of success trying to measure things with a saw. I don't care how they actually work. It's a matter of grabbing the right tool, and you already have the tools that you need. It's a matter of using them in an appropriate way. There's no magic inside the software that's out there.
No matter how long I listen to you, Tony, I just when I think I have all of your analogies and metaphors, you keep coming out with more that are completely effective, and I hope to keep up with you with my puns, but that's a lot of good new material. And as I go over to Scott for your response, I would also add to that when it comes to tools that even for commercial enterprises that have substantial budgets for tools, we strongly recommend that they don't make an investment until further down that CRISP process, after they've done the business understanding, after they've done the data understanding, after we have assessed a lot about their environment, their users, their analysts, their situation, their objectives. We can then target a tool that is far more fitting for the organization and right-sized. And until that time, even open source can be used very effectively to come up with some prototypes so we can get projections of ROI and the like. A very effective way to stepping into it until investment, which can be very expensive in commercial software, is made. DM has just thanked us for our responses on his questions, saying he likes to take a very pragmatic approach, and I think the SI course seems to have gotten traction with him. Scott, would you like to extend with the tools response for Tatiana?
I would double underscore everything that's already been said. It's not the paintbrush that's the painter. That's one of my favorite sayings. But to be very brief and very specific. Because this is a question I can't, we get a lot. From the commercial side, SAS and SPSS are the two market leaders in that order. On the open source side, I generally recommend folks to look at R, Weka, RapidMiner, KNIME. Those are four good open source tools with differing levels of functionality. Some of them are more process flow oriented, and then you have R, which is more difficult to learn, but it's more comprehensive.
Great tips. Great tips. I think that's
Eric, can I jump back in? Can I
sure.
make one more comment on this that I don't normally make?
Yeah.
And I don't know why I've never said this before, because we do get this question all the time. I'm going to suggest that as opposed to being concerned about software and the algorithms that are being run, that you spend a lot more time figuring out how to massage your data and do the kinds of things that Scott was talking about in the data preparation phase to be more effective at extracting the information content. That's not a software issue. That's specific to the problem that you're working on. And you actually get much more benefit out of getting your data right. And when I say right, I mean getting it in the format that is appropriate for what you're trying to achieve on your problem and enhances your performance. If you can get the data set up right and you can get the problem structured appropriately, the math is pretty easy, and the software really becomes relatively trivial.
Well, and that is a tremendous segue into the last question that I'll entertain, actually second to last. Tatiana just asked, thank you, will there be a recording of the webinar? Actually, there is not. We do that on purpose because we offer it live monthly. We want to encourage people to come back and participate again in the polling, and of course the Q&A segment is different every time, or some different content and the like. So you can always go back to that webinar page at the website and sign up for another session, and it's another way to come back through the content and bring some new questions back with you that we'll be happy to entertain again in a future future Q&A session. So the last question we're going to take from Jason, and again, this is where Tony was leaving off, is a great segue here. At what point can one start using models reliably in the real world? In other words, after how much training, in your opinion, would somebody be ready to go forward? And I think what you were alluding to, Tony, is that so many modern tools really handle the mathematical complexity. Nobody needs to be a PhD in statistics or mathematics anymore to build far more than adequate models, as long as a good project definition is in place, as long as there was a thorough assessment and good data preparation to guide the effort. That's really what's setting the rocket upside down on the launch pad. You know, the rocket's a highly sophisticated piece of equipment, and that can be prepared with a high degree of automation from modern software that's available. So the effort from the user really has to come not from the technical areas, but more from the strategic. And that's where we do separate out these two courses. One you can think of as the mechanics course, working under the hood, more of the methods and techniques to build a more than adequate model, and then is the strategic class to ensure that it's like the driver's course. We're going to get to a specific destination at a specific time as best we can, and understand the metrics by which we got there, that they can be measured because we did our work there in advance. So as far as the training goes, it's not a huge technical hurdle. It's really becoming familiar with the full process, and I don't know of any other courses available that focus on the strategic side of this, and that's, as you've seen in this webinar, where most projects fall short. And people aren't to blame. Many of the questions we had here around software, when we look at business intelligence, it typically works. When you have a problem, you understand which software applies to it, you buy the software, you put your resources to it, you get an answer, you solve your problem. So it's very natural to think of these things in a way that, get the software, apply the data, and bing, you got your answer and you get your reward. But with predictive analytics, it's a much more of a soft type science where it involves a number of players, a number of people on the team, a lot of strategic aspects that have to come into how you're going to implement the model, and work with leadership to determine how to even translate the results in terms that they'll appreciate. So that's where there's really a mix of tactical and strategic in order to really succeed in this practice. So that's my part of that answer. Let me start with Scott. Question again is, to start applying models reliably in the real world, how much training, in your opinion, would somebody need?
Boy, that's a good question. It's really person dependent. You can get started on a project with having very little training whatsoever, as long as you're focused on one application and you have the time to work it through and do your studying. But everybody starts with one project and grows from there. I would suggest that when you learn the process that we teach, which is the CRISP-DM process, that's kind of baked into the process. you know that you know that you're being successful because part of the process is performing tests on the model and learning how to perform tests on the model's efficacy prior to actually rolling it out. So you get at least one, 99% of the time, 2 additional measures of how well the model works prior to trying to implement it.
Yeah, those are great considerations. And as I go over to Tony, one thing I'd like to add is the way that the modeling agency has structured its services around this. That the training courses, nobody, as you would imagine, no matter how effective these courses are, and Tony and Scott are among the best at conveying the technology in a tremendous amount of content within a 1-week time frame. Nobody's going to be an expert after 1 week of concentrated training. As pragmatic, as hands-on as it is, as reinforcing as it is, but it does take a significant spike out of that large learning curve. From there, we also have services that will, like I say, stand up a collaborative effort to establish a predictive analytic process or even practice. And what's great about that structure is that there are short workshops, on-site workshops, where you work side by side with an expert to step you through the full analytic process and also roadmap a plan for your overall enterprise. Then the instructor goes away. You get to, again, experience that natural messiness. You encounter the realities of analytics. But then there's a large remote bank of time. You have an open door to your consultant to continue the collaboration so that as you hit hurdles, as you hit challenges, you can maneuver them with that real-world experience that your highly seasoned consultant and trainer has. Then they return at the right interval to continue with a very methodical series of short workshops and that remote support in order to, again, step through the full model development process and even stand up a repeatable practice. And it's those things in combination that I believe is the most efficient and effective path for somebody to really reinforce the skills to be a highly effective predictive modeler, not just understanding the technical aspects, but being highly effective at really deploying models that are going to have the kind of impact that will get the attention of leadership. Before we wrap up, Tony, anything to expand on that as far as anyone's background and the best way to learn?
Especially for the people that have stuck around with us for this extra 20 minutes or so. One of the real insights, and one of the things that I think keeps the rocket from being pointed upside down isn't around the algorithms, it's not even around the data. We spend far too much time worrying about what goes on the right-hand side of the equal sign and slicing and dicing our dependent variables, and don't spend nearly enough time worried about the left-hand side of the equal sign and how we set up our training data set. And the output variable, the independent variable in our training data set is the study guide for these algorithms to work with. We don't take the time to go through that they meet the working definitions and the assumptions and constraints that our business managers are actually going to adhere to. If you are going to be trading a treasury instrument or a stock or a bond, and you're not willing to do short sales, don't put short sales in your training data set because you can't execute them, and the models don't know that. Your software doesn't understand the business problem. You tell it that you're looking for fraud. It doesn't find fraud, it finds errors. And if you tell it all of the errors, you're going to send auditors out who are going to come back and say, we owe them money. And that's probably not what you want. And by the same token, you don't want to send an auditor out and to come back with $1.23. But if that's what you get built into your training data set, that's what your algorithms are going to learn. And people don't spend enough, most people don't take the time to compute what their performance metrics would be on their training data set. They may find out that the way they built the training data set, there's no room to get an enhancement. Those are the kinds of things that most people aren't aware of in a practical implementation of how to make these projects work. And this is what we talk about a lot in the classes, but this is the kind of thing that you also need to go through, and it really is just a matter of practice and thinking about these problems and taking the kinds of ideas. We don't present answers. Nothing we say is absolutely right. We talk about issues. And we talk about the kinds of conditions and how to adapt to various scenarios and deal with those issues depending on what you're trying to achieve. Actually achieving that and dealing with those issues does just take practice.
Oh, shucks, Tony. I told people when they come to our classes they can get a cookie cutter. Not true, huh?
Definitely not.
Yeah, right. A lot of good judgment to be had there. And there is an overlying roadmap and a lot of best rules of thumb that can be applied. But in the end, it has to come up against reality and good judgment. So
yes, and that's what we do is we talk about the issues, and we're clear, and it's a pretty comprehensive coverage of the issues. But unfortunately, they are the issues. We're doing analysis, not engineering. This isn't an erector set that you bolt together the parts and everything works. You have to deal with the issues, set the problem up the right way, handle your data the right way, and make everything work, and it is unique. All of these projects are custom.
Fantastic advice. And here we're at 25 after the hour. We still have about a dozen people with us that have stuck around unexpectedly for almost an extra half an hour. So we're going to draw this event to a close. And certainly thank our attendees today for your sustained interest and your active participation, as well as Scott and Tony for your great segments and, of course, your highly valuable and sometimes entertaining Q&A contributions. We'll follow up with an email shortly with those resources I promised and suggestions that will hopefully be useful to you. From there, we'll hope you'll offer permission for us to stay in touch through the Modeling Agency's newsletter and consider joining us at a public training event soon. Recall that the deeply discounted Hopetel group rate for next month's San Jose event expires tomorrow, and only 6 spaces remain in that production, so you'll want to move quickly. And as well, the early bird incentive runs out on August 12th for the September series in Washington, D.C., which is already over half full. Now, if you would like to benefit from your early efforts, instead of just reducing the bill for your organization, we can hand you up to $200 in Visa gift cards at the course instead for your own personal use. You can select which discount you'd like to receive in the online registration form, and don't forget that your colleagues can join you anytime for up to 30% off. Now, if you don't have a training or travel budget but would like the guidance of a seasoned mentor, you might be interested in the Modeling Agency's Wire Support program. Wire Support is essentially a retainer account that provides remote open access to a TMA senior consultant. Simply open up a Wire Support account, and you've instantly added a wealth of experience and capability to your existing bench without expanding payroll, administrating complicated contracts, or taking elevated risk on larger commitments. We'll get you the answers you want, guide you through it, show you how it's done, implement any data mining tasks you may wish to delegate, and then we'll remain on call until the next time you need us. And meanwhile, when we're not actively working, you're not paying a dime. So a link to the Wire Support description page will be among the resources included in the follow-up email. On behalf of myself, Tony, and Scott, thank you again for attending Data Mining Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon and evening, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a